Our top focus this morning, at least 300 people were killed after a Gaza hospital came under attack. Many are feared to be trapped under the rubble.
Hamas has called this attack a genocide, even as Israel denies any role behind the strike.
Following the deadly airstrike, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has declared 3 days of mourning for the victims. Injured men, women and children are being carried to Gaza City's al-Shifa Hospital, which is 1.5 kilometers away from the al-arabi hospital.
Palestinian civil defense has called the bombing on al-ahli hospital Israel's deadliest airstrike since 2008. Israel's defense forces have blamed the strike on Hamas and the Islamic Jihad movement over there, saying that a barrage of rockets was fired by terrorists in Gaza, passing in close proximity to the hospital in question here, which was bombarded in Gaza at the time that it was hit. Now, the IDF has also released a footage purportedly backing that claim.
The IDF maintains the attack to be the responsibility of the Islamic Jihad. And for more on this, we're now being joined live by principal diplomatic correspondent Siddhant Sibal from Tel Aviv, who's joining us live on the show right now. Thank you so much for joining us, Siddhant. Siddhant, to begin with, what can you tell us of the situation on ground currently?
Well, I'm right now standing in Tel Aviv. It's just around 5 a.m. in the morning, but situation remains precarious. One thing I can tell you, almost as a daily ritual, I have seen every evening there have been sirens blaring in Tel Aviv and across Israel as well. Yesterday, just a day before the visit of the US President Joe Biden, almost 3 rocket attacks were launched, one near our hotel, and all of these attacks were of course intercepted by the Iron Dome. But the fact that they are being fired by Hamas from Gaza over a week after that terror attack, the deadly terror attack of 7th October, showcases the capability Hamas has. But even as the situation evolves, we have been traveling to southern part of Israel, where we have seen not only movement of the troops and the tanks, but also increased security. And many of these areas today have become no-go areas, with civilians being evacuated.
Siddhant, it's an absolute tragedy what has happened. Of course, it has been a build-up of days and days and days of attacks and several civilian deaths. And now this one, which has been perhaps the deadliest one of them all, which we saw in the hospital. Now, humanitarian aid is required here now more than ever before. Talk to us about who is running Gaza right now. Even if the aid comes in, who is going to control it? Who is going to sort of distribute it? Who takes charge?
Well, it's amply clear that right now Hamas is under control of at least large parts of Gaza. Now, since 7th of October attack, we have seen the Israeli side pounding many parts of Gaza, saying that they are targeting the Hamas hideouts. But of course, it has been leading to a major humanitarian catastrophe. The UN has pointed out several times again. In fact, Western leaders, along with the Arab leaders from the region, have asked Israel to reduce or make sure that there is a stoppage in its pounding of Gaza Strip because of the ongoing humanitarian crisis. But it is a major challenge for Netanyahu in many senses, given that, of course, there is globally diplomatic pressure, but also when it comes to here in Israel, we have seen how he is under pressure from the people here in Israel, because there is palpable anger and they want strong action against Hamas. And if he doesn't take strong action, then he could face a political suicide.
All right. Thanks, Siddhant, for joining in at this hour. And of course, you're tracking all the developments right there from Tel Aviv. And we'll be in touch with you for more. Take care of yourself as well.
Also joining us live right now is Lester Mudsid from Washington, D.C. He's a senior fellow at the National Security Institute. Sir, thank you so much for joining us on World DNA.
Thanks for having me.
Now, sir, gut-wrenching visuals of human suffering coming in from the Gaza hospital. IDF seems to be denying its involvement. But is anyone buying into this narrative? That's the big question.
Well, I think we need to have an investigation and see what the facts show. There does seem to be a decent case that this may have been a rocket fired from Gaza, possibly by Palestinian Islamic Jihad. They were launching missiles from that very area. Their missiles are not of high quality and are known to misfire and have been known to kill Palestinians. That happens on a regular basis. So I don't know that what the facts are. I think they need to be determined, but I think we owe both sides a little grace in this terrible situation. And I think people should stop jumping to conclusions about how this happened and maybe let cooler heads prevail.
Also joining us right now is our correspondent Susan Tehrani, who's joining us from New York. Susan, thank you so much for joining us. Now, Susan, as you know, this situation, this unprecedented, shocking incident, it further complicates diplomatic overtures by the United States. U.S. President Joe Biden was, of course, is on a rather fraught trip to West Asia. How do you see the situation?
It was already on a weak wicket that he was going, you know,
and
how do you
see the situation now unfolding going forward?
Yeah, this was already a high-stake trip by President Biden going to the Middle East region, and now it's just become more complicated and complex after that attack on the hospital in Gaza. And as our guest rightly mentioned, we're still waiting to find out really what happened. But it really comes at a time when, unfortunately, Arab countries decided to go full on, jump to one side of the conclusion and accuse Israel of this attack, setting the framework and basically for President Biden not to meet with Arab leaders. First of all, we heard Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas cancel his visit with President Biden. And then shortly after, we heard that summit in Amman, Jordan was going to be canceled as well, where Egypt's President al-Sisi was also expected to take part in. We did hear from the White House through a statement that this was something that both sides had agreed on mutually because of those 3 days of mourning that due to that hospital attack. But nonetheless, you know, the situation has just become a lot more complex. It's very unclear what President Biden is going to Israel to do. He could have perhaps provided that kind of support that he has so far from Camp David. Would that have been more effective than going to Israel at this point, just on the brink of a possible ground offensive by Israeli troops? And while the White House has denied this, there are those that believe that because President Biden's going to be there, then Israel's military activities are going to be hampered, and they'll possibly wait until President Biden leaves, giving Hamas more time to plan for this incursion.
Susan, stay with us. I'd just like to go back to our guest, Mr. Munson. I just want to take this with you. It doesn't happen every day that a scheduled meeting with the US president gets cancelled. Has the Arab League turned their face away? Or are we seeing remnants of that right now? Are we seeing hints of that at the moment?
Well, I think this is a very volatile situation. A tragedy has happened. There's a reaction on the street to what people think they understand about the situation. That puts political leaders in a very difficult spot. There's no doubt about that. I am sure that the Biden administration is working behind the scenes right now to put back together these meetings and try to build some sort of path forward here for a successful resolution of this crisis. So I think we shouldn't jump to too many conclusions ourselves about the current state. It is certainly in chaos, but I expect professional diplomats, political leaders to say the things that they need to say and perhaps get to a place where they can reconstruct these meetings. It is important that folks get together and have discussions about humanitarian access and other aspects of what we are likely to see in the coming days. So while the situation is tragic, I'm a little bit hopeful that some of this can be put back together in the next few hours.
In fact, sir, I was just going to come to this. We've been analyzing the stakes of Joe Biden's visit as well. There was obviously buzz around a peace deal being in the offing, and now the hospital strike. What are the options now?
Well, it remains an opportunity for President Biden to show leadership and to show diplomacy and grace but also toughness when dealing with radical elements like Hamas and possibly Palestinian Islamic Jihad here. So he needs to rise to the occasion. It's a very difficult situation. He's presumably on his way there right now, perhaps in the air. So it's a big task ahead for the American president. We'll see how he does.
All right, stay with us, sir. I'll just like to go back to Susan. Susan, is it almost certain now that Biden will return without a deal? It was already a fraud trip, as you mentioned earlier, and we have been discussing it. Is there anything that he would come back with in hand, and any type of normalization talks are out of the window now?
Well, it was unclear what kind of deal President Biden wanted to reach with Arab states. The issue that sort of went forward, and it's somewhat of a glimmer of hope, is Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said that President Biden agreed to visit Israel only after the Israelis agreed to let humanitarian aid go to Gaza for the Palestinian population that are not members of Hamas. This itself, by the way, is challenging considering the fact that the UN agency that provides aid to the Palestinians, UNRWA, tweeted that it does send aid. However, some of its aid, and this has happened before, was stolen by Hamas militants. Despite that, the president did get this kind of assurance from the Israelis before going there. So from the humanitarian aspect of it, perhaps some kind of corridor would be open. And then you have, the issue of the hostages. That's very important for the president to perhaps directly sit across the table with Prime Minister Netanyahu and, talk about the hostages. Again, perhaps a little bit of glimmer of hope if we can take their word. Hamas said that they're willing to release non-Israeli hostages. And then also, it's the issue that President Biden, this is something that's, it's been criticized somewhat, is President Biden wants to see the military map and plan of the Israelis for this ground offensive to ensure that it doesn't spill over to a greater conflict in the Middle East. But nonetheless, the fact that just the optics of the fact that these Arab leaders are not meeting with President Biden, I'm not sure. However way you look at it, it's just not a good look right now.
Not at all in the president's favor at the moment. Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining in, Susan, at this hour. And we'll be in touch with you for more updates as the trip unfolds further for the US president. And Mr. Wilson, just one last question with you. I want to come back. Now, Washington, Paris, Brussels, UN, WHO, we are seeing wide-scale condemnation against the carnage at the Gaza hospital. Would we see Israel on the back foot after this hospital massacre, or do you feel then it's not going to hamper their move forward?
Well, I think we have. It's a terrible situation. There's no doubt, and I think we've known since this terrible episode began several days ago that Israel was going to have to go into Gaza and root out Hamas and the rest of the terrorist infrastructure there, and that would be a very fraught exercise because there are innocent people who are there in Gaza. And that while this was necessary, there was going to be very bad consequences for it. That has been a known thing for quite some time. This has made that a little bit more acute. And so I think the task for President Biden, when he gets there, put back together some sort of diplomatic arrangement, work with Egypt to perhaps open that border to Gaza and maybe have some constructive things happen there, get relief for the Israeli hostages in Gaza, others who may be being held there. There's a lot of work to do. I think it's still a very good thing that the American president is going there. Hopefully some good will come of it.
All right. Mr. Lestermanson, thank you so much for joining us on the show with your insights and perspective on this.
Thank you.